Today is November 23rd, 2011. My name is Marty Dick, and I'm interviewing Steve Waltman, who's a resident of the town of Sunshine since 1990 and a firefighter in the Fourmile Canyon Fire starting September 6, 2010. Steve, how long have you been involved with the fire department?
I became involved with the department when I moved to Sunshine 21 years ago. And I started as a volunteer firefighter. I've served on the board of directors. I was assistant chief and then chief. And now I've stepped back and other people have taken the role of chief and running the department. We're a small department. We've got about a half dozen people who reliably show up at 3 o'clock in the morning for the smoke report that turns out to be nothing. We have another dozen or so who do come by on calls and trainings when they can make it. So when the Fourmile fire started, my first thought was that for once it was a call that didn't catch me 2 hours after I should have eaten, not having slept the night before, that we had gone to our favorite restaurant with our good friends Doug and Pam and their kids the night before, gotten a wonderful meal and gotten to bed early. So when the call came in late morning, I was fed and rested and ready to go. So I jumped into my wildland firefighting gear and raced over to the station. Now, the 3 fire districts in the area, Sunshine, Gold Hill, and Fourmile, have been doing more joint operations. And at that time, only some people had their pagers set up to alert them of calls in all 3 districts. I had not yet done that with my pager, so I didn't hear the initial call for Fourmile, but they almost immediately called Sunshine. There was only a 5 or 10 minute delay. But that was enough time for some of the others to have already taken 2 of the trucks out. So when I got to the station, half of our trucks were gone. And Mike Sanders showed up at the station shortly after I did. And I made the call that since it was upwind of us and downhill of us, I didn't want to strip the district bare in case we had a fire start in our own district. We didn't have to wait for the trucks to come back here, or if it got to our district, I wanted there to be some resources here. So Mike Sanders and I jumped in our car, in my car, and we drove in my private vehicle to the fire. And as we were heading down the canyon, listening to the radio traffic to get some situational awareness of what was going on, one of the first things I heard that really sort of set the tone for the whole day was the chief of Fourmile calling directly for an airdrop, for air support on the fire. Now, sometimes fire districts will route the request for an airdrop through the emergency service department of the sheriff's office, because if the sheriff's office orders it, you have a much better chance of getting them to pay for it. If you order it, you might get stuck paying for it. It's, you have to do more discussion about retroactively would they have ordered it and all that. He didn't worry about that at all. He just ordered it immediately, which told me that, okay, he doesn't care how much it costs, or he knows they'll pay for it. It's big, it's dangerous, he's losing control of it. So that was the first indication. And then dispatch called back, responded to his request and told him, sorry, you can't have air support. That told me that, yeah, he really wants the air support, he can't have it. That's not good news. And then dispatch followed that up with another punch, which was the reason you can't have it is it's grounded due to the high wind. And so that was sort of the 1, 2, 3, all right, this is not going to be one of those go out, play for 4 hours, then come home, have dinner fires. This was going to last a while. As we continued driving down the canyon to cut over to Fourmile, There was also radio traffic of a propane tank exploded near the origin of the fire. And that happens in these fires. But there was a firefighter close by, and the radio traffic of the chief calling for the firefighter, repeatedly asking him to respond on the radio, and sort of the absence of all of the radio traffic as everyone was listening to the drama. Did we just lose? Did a firefighter just get seriously injured or killed in the first minutes of this fire? Eventually, he came on the radio, the firefighter in question came on the radio and reported that he was okay. His voice was a little shaky. He was a little close to where it blew, but he wasn't injured. So we were all grateful, but that sort of also it was a vivid reminder that things can go wrong and how close we could come. So we made our way to Fourmile Station next to a pond close to the fire, and caught up with one of our trucks, our brush truck, 4532, which is a small four-wheel drive truck, ideal for fighting forest fires. But its assignment was to suck water out of the pond and refill the trucks fighting the fire, because up in the mountains we have no hydrants, so you have to transport all the water by trucks. And so we were to set up a filling station. They were underway setting that up, so we assisted, joined up with them. Already on that truck was our assistant chief, Rick Lansky, and our former chief, Steve Stratton. And we got set up and we're filling a truck, and we had Mike Sanders, who didn't have a lot of experience, put him to work being a lookout. Told him to stand on top of the truck, because the pond's not in a high spot with good visibility. It's sort of down at a low spot. That's where the water collects. And we told him to just sort of watch the fire and keep an eye on it. And he wasn't quite sure what he was looking at. But over the course of our filling the truck, the fire went from being this column of smoke illuminated by orange flames that was sort of this much of the horizon, and a few minutes later it was this much of the horizon. And it was starting to encompass the direction we needed to go to leave the area. So we made the decision that it was time to pull back. And so we disconnected the truck, threw some of our equipment on the truck, left some of it there, and started heading down the canyon. And not surprisingly, as the fire grew to that extent over just a few minutes, the radio traffic became a lot more intense. So we couldn't get through on the radio to tell the people who were in charge of us, oh, we had to leave, or we made the call to leave. While we were driving down the road, they called us and suggested, hey guys, you might want to leave. And we were able to tell them, already on it. So they set up a staging area, which originally was going to be at an intersection in a 4 mile, but they realized that was too close. So that one didn't last. Because we were on the lead wave of the retreating trucks, we were one of the first there, waited a few minutes, and they decided, no, we don't want to stage there. Moved the staging down to Poor Man Road. We were one of the first trucks there. That was where I was able to knock on a door of a house there and borrow a phone, because in the mountains cell phones don't work, at least not in that part of the canyons. And I called my wife and I told her that for the first time in our 21 years, it was time to start packing the valuables and to evacuate. She had not yet gotten the call. I think my advance notice only gave her like 10 or 15 minutes over when the evacuation call came in from the reverse 911. But we made that call. Staging was then relocated as trucks were arriving, briefly to the Boulder Mountain Lodge, but they realized the parking was too tight there, and then back in the town of Boulder at the Justice Center parking lot. Since it was a holiday, it was empty, and they could take it over, and it had plenty of room for all the fire trucks. So we made it down to the Justice Center, ate the meals that we had on the truck, which were the military-style meals ready to eat, otherwise known as meals refused by everyone, or other things. But we had lunch and waited what seemed like a intolerably long time because we wanted to be up in the fight, working on saving things. Finally, they got organized, and we were part of a strike team of engines, a group of similar engines that went up the canyon in a parade.
And what canyon were you going up?
Up Sunshine Canyon. But our assignment was to actually help at the Colorado Mountain Ranch on the west side of Gold Hill. We went up through Sunshine and were happy to see that the fire had not yet hit Sunshine. At the rise, before dropping down into Gold Hill, the strike team stopped briefly, and there was some discussion between the leader of the strike team and the command structure of the fire about whether we were going to try and widen the road by burning off the grass on one side in a controlled manner using the fire trucks to keep it from spreading, to create a fire break, or continue on down. And so after, again, what seemed like a long time, during which time those of us in our truck were standing in our truck and looking back towards Sunshine and looking at the column of smoke, trying to see how far away is it going to hit Sunshine. We finally head down towards Gold Hill, and with that many fire trucks on the narrow roads, it was a bit of a traffic jam to get through Gold Hill, but we finally weave our way through Gold Hill, during which time we get a alert over the paging system that the fire is reaching our brand new station. And we continue to the Colorado Mountain Ranch, where the sudden influx of fire trucks creates this brief but serious parking jam nightmare, because fire trucks are not the most maneuverable. And if you take a parade of 6 or 8 fire trucks and drive them into a small driveway without a good plan on where it's going, it turns into a mess. Which is about the time we decided that that was really not where we needed to be. And I like to think that during a moment when Stratton got out of the car, he told the person in charge that we were leaving, although stories I've heard afterwards, maybe that's not the way it happened. But one way or another, we left, and our goal was to go back to Sunshine and see what we could do and what was happening, and make sure it was taken care of. Once we get free of the parking nightmare and head our way back, we debate whether to take the long way around or whether to go back up the hill to Sunshine. The problem with the direct way is that it's sort of driving straight into the fire. So we discussed the safety, and I put forth the plan, which the others agree to, that we can head up to the point where the smoke and fire and topography make it clear that it's a bad way to go. That the extra time of taking 10 or 15 minutes to try that and fail would not significantly delay us compared to the time it takes to drive the long way around. So we head up, and it gets pretty smoky, and can't really see where we're going. And so the decision was made by the group to turn around and go the long way and try and approach the district from the other side, where it's not as steep and not as directly above where the active fire is. So we head back down Lick Skillet, back down Left-Hand Canyon, out to North Broadway, and come back with the lights and sirens going, as fast as we can safely travel. All the while wondering what we're going to find when we get back to our district. We finally get back to the base of Sunshine Canyon and head up Sunshine Canyon. And as we get up to the Bald Mountain parking lot, we meet the Boulder Rural trucks. And they had been up fighting the fire, but had been driven back by the fire conditions because it was sort of actively hitting Sunshine at that point. And we tie in with them and coordinate evacuating the lower part of the canyon to make sure, double check that everyone got the message to evacuate and that everyone was safe. So we work on that for a while, and finally, after we've ensured that everyone's out, we get to head back up into the fire area pretty much after most of the major fire activity has passed. And it's now, at that time it was towards the end of the day, just a little bit of daylight left, but they're starting to make serious airdrops to try and contain the fire, painting a line with retardant near Bald Mountain, and see them making regular drops.
Excuse me, Steve, what did that look like?
To be honest, on most fires, you know, it's sort of a big deal to have all the air support. Mm-hmm. And so normally I pay a fair bit of attention, maybe even try and get the camera out. We were just so focused on seeing what was going on with our district. We sort of noticed it enough to be able to drive through the area without safely without getting hit by the drop. But I didn't really watch the air show much, not on that day. It was the airdrops are interesting because there's a pilot plane that if there is a downdraft, a heavily laden drop plane does not have enough power to react and to bad smoke conditions or bad wind conditions or a mistaken navigation. So they send a small, almost overpowered pilot plane through with the heavy just a few seconds behind it. And that way, if the small plane runs into trouble, it has enough power to save itself, and it gives the big plane just a few seconds of warning, you know, look out, and that gives him the margin he would need to survive. And so it is kind of neat to see the pilot plane come through with the heavy behind it, but we pretty much just ignored it and noticed good, you know, there is air support. Air support can also provide a little bit of a margin of safety that if something goes wrong, they can provide immediate, you know, fire suppression in some area. But, you know, so it's always nice to have, you know, the tankers at your back. But
where did the tankers actually drop the slurry?
It was in a line across from Bald Mountain over towards just east of Lee Hill. And so there's a, which was the eastern edge of the fire in that area, that they were really trying to keep it from coming down the canyon and hit Boulder. But we went through the line and up into the district. And it was so smoky that you couldn't really see anything except the immediate area around you. And so whereas normally from the intersection of 83, I could see my house, of 83 and Sunshine Canyon, I can see my house a mile and a half away. I couldn't see, you know, a quarter mile. So I had no idea what the fire was doing on the other side of Sunshine, how much it had spared or not going through there. So we tied in with the crews that were doing what they could there, and finally we got authorized by the command structure to do a scouting run. They were hesitant to send firefighting teams up to the end of 83 because County Road 83 is essentially a dead-end road with no passable escape for vehicles. And so driving a mile and a half in the dead-end road, we knew the terrain and the topography and felt that we could do it safely if we paid attention to the fire, but they didn't want to have fire operations where people are distracted. But we were able to do a scouting run to go in and see what things were like. We drove up to Whispering Pines to check. I mentioned earlier Steve Stratton was in the truck, and saw that his house, which has stucco siding, was still there. The fire had mostly burned by, but there was a shed, small outbuilding house nearby that was threatened. We pulled the booster line off the truck to do what we could to save that. And fought that for a while, that we'd make some progress and the wind would kick up and the fire would make some progress. And went back and forth for a while, and then a big gust of wind came and a stand of trees below Stratton's house just exploded into flame. And there was a lot more smoke in the air and a lot more fire around. So we made the decision once again, it was time to leave that area. So we left, got back in the truck and left. And as we were pulling away, Steve Stratton was certain that his house was a goner. It ended up surviving, but at the time he thought from the fire activity below it that it would be enough to take his house. Similarly, my house, which is further up County Road 83, that neck of the woods was okay at that time, but the road sort of loops across the bottom of a hill below my house, and then my house is at the top of the hill. And the house at the hairpin below my house was gone, and there was fire on the hill below my house. And so while my house was there, it was like, a lit fuse that the fire had no choice but to burn up the hill with my house at the top. And it was really difficult for me to not start a fight with the other people in the truck, which I knew they would fight me and say, I'll get out here. And because I had the feeling that I could be safe enough and work on saving my house. But it's very much not what, it's against several of the rules of firefighting. You don't have one person fighting by themselves in one area, and getting into the evacuated area in the fire truck and then deciding you're not a firefighter, several things wrong with that plan, and yet, I could save my house. So I, with great difficulty, bit my tongue and rode back to the to the command post there, and we were debriefed and released for the night. It was late that night. And so we head back down to the Justice Center staging area. It's normal for the initial attack crews, the people who were in the middle of doing this or that, to get released after 12 hours of fighting the fire, because they didn't have time to get, fully prepared for an extended attack. And then that's enough time for the other crews who are more told, report for a 6 p.m. briefing, you have 2 hours, get prepared for a 24-hour fight or fighting, more extended engagement to come in. So it's normal for the initial attack crews to get released. Doesn't always happen, but we were released. We went back, parked the truck to the Justice Center. I found my car, which, since I joined the truck, I'd left my car at one of the earlier staging areas, but some other firefighters, the way the rides worked out, needed a ride, so I gave them my car and told them just leave it at the Justice Center. And I found my car and got on the cell phone to find out where my wife and kids were, went and met her, told her that our house was still there, so it survived the initial push, but that there were no firefighters in that neck of the woods because it was too dangerous, especially at night, and there was fire on the hill, and so the prognosis did not look good. So I ended up laying in bed most of that night, not sleeping, just trying to wrap my head around the odds of my losing the house, which I could almost grasp, but I work out of the house, and I build high-tech electronic circuits that I sell to research universities. The loss of my job of burning up the house, that was too much for me to wrap my head around. I was also trying to imagine a way that the fire could burn the way uphill like it had to burn, and yet not take my house with it. And I sort of had this overwhelming belief that, I needed to imagine a scenario where the house could survive in order for there to be one. And if I can't even concoct one, then it's hopeless. And I just wanted to hope that maybe we would be lucky. And as it turns out, the one I came up with appears to be what happened. That, well, the fire was below our house is on a ridge, and the fire burned up to hit the ridge, not directly below our house, but uphill of our house. So the fire that got to our house was backing downhill and was not nearly as intense and didn't preheat the house. So while the fire burned up to the house and went out, without setting the house on fire, which was an unbelievable stroke of luck for us, it was close. So the next day, I finally get some sleep, fall asleep around dawn, sleep for a few hours. I decided I wasn't going to fight the fire on day 2. There were enough younger, more gung-ho people around to take care of that. I got a phone call from Doug Young mid-morning, who informed me that our other truck, who was on the fire, 4501, our big engine, with our, at the time, chief, Bruce Honeyman, and Peter Beresford, had not been released from the fire, and they had been fighting the fire for 24 hours. While I was content to sit back and let other people fight the fire, I was not content to let other people go into their second day continuous firefighting while I had gotten some rest and a shower and some food. So I went up to join that truck, found the truck around noon or something the second day. And their assignment was to protect a house. There was a house across from Bald Mountain with a garage that was, the garage was on fire. And they did not have enough resources to climb up into the eaves inside the house and save the garage. So the garage was a loss. But their objective was to save the house. But the garage was close enough to the house that the radiant heat from it would probably start the house on fire unless we did something. So we were there, and as the garage fire got hotter, we would spray down the house. And at its peak, most of us were in Wildland gear, but since I brought my car up to join them, I had my structure firefighting gear, as did another person. And so I would be in my structure jacket, and I would stand behind the nozzleman, typically Peter, as he sprayed the house with my jacket spread in the back to the fire to catch the radiant heat. And after doing that for a while, my jacket would get too hot, I would get too hot, and I'd have to leave. And so the other person with the structure jacket would come in and take their turn. And when he would have to leave, then Peter would wait a few more seconds till he was too hot, and then he'd pull out, and we'd cool off, and then we'd go back in and do it again. And we did that until the garage burned down and the house was saved. It was definitely steaming when we were spraying it down, and but we were able to keep it cool and even keep most of the windows from cracking. So we got to chalk that one up as a save. So after doing that, we got directed up to County Road 83, where Eric Bader, who was fire chief after me, but is now heavily involved in wildland firefighting, he was in charge of an attempt to get resources up to the upper end of 83 and to do what we could at fire suppression there. But the out-of-town resources were really concerned about heading up the dead-end road, particularly since there was a fire at Danny's mine, which was right halfway up the road, and but below the road, a steep hill. And so there was fire below the road that if the fire spread to the trees nearby, it would close the road. And you don't want to have firefighters on the wrong side of the road when it gets closed by the fire activity picking up. So, a wind shift or something. So Eric came up with this plan where we used 4501, our big truck, to shoot at the limit of its range, using a straight bore nozzle, a stream as far as it could reach, which just reached the fire at the mine. That we couldn't get down to it because you would have to drive past it to loop around to get down to the fire. And so I worked with 4501, and I was on the nozzle. We were able to hit the fire and knock it down, except there was one spot we couldn't quite reach. And after using about a quarter of our tank water shooting foam, which does a great job of suppressing fire and is sparing in its water usage, I had him switch to straight water, which gives us a little bit more range. But shooting foam, we used a quarter of the tank of water. And then just the few seconds of the straight stream to get the range, we used another third of a tank on top of that. But we got the fire we need to get down. So that knocked it down enough that one of the other trucks could loop around and mop up the bits, the small bits remaining. The other trucks, the group of trucks, could then head up to the end of 83 and do what good work they can. And we were assigned to stay there and just keep the road open to defend against any, other fire starts or any embers that would block the road there. And so we guarded the road while they went up to the end of 83 and did what they could. So
I remember you telling me earlier that when you were fighting the fire that was steaming inside the house, you later discovered that...
Oh yeah, yeah. On fighting that fire, when I got home that night after we did all this, when we were finally released later that night, I discovered that the backs of my legs were all burned through my Wildland firefighting pneumatics just from the radiant heat heating them up. That, when I say we were getting hot, yeah, we were getting hot enough to get burned through our clothing. It was a real exposure to some heat. But so yeah, that was the second day, and the remaining days of the fire kind of blur together in some mixture. The winds hitting and the concern about the winds hitting Thursday night was memorable, but fortunately, although they picked up, it didn't really kick up the fire activity. It was a real challenge for the fire management team, to put it kindly, that this fire was unusual in that it almost leapfrogged from ridgetop to ridgetop, and then it started burning in the valleys. Normally in a big fire, the activity, the losses, tended to be more concentrated on the perimeter than this one was. And so the standard tactics are really to try and fight the fire at the perimeter. But the challenge was that this fire had so much unburned area inside the perimeter that that's a lot more to keep track of what areas have burned hard, what areas are actively burning still, what areas are still green and can be defended. And so the resources weren't always allocated to have enough people on the interior to fight it. I was fortunate being on the truck that I could arrange to do scouting runs past and find out, how good my house is still there, or found out at some point that my wife had, in the packing frenzy, had grabbed the travel wallet with passports and her green card, since she's not a citizen, but it didn't make it in the suitcase. It was on the floor. And so the people driving the truck were courteous enough to make a wrong turn and end up at the top of my driveway for a minute while they took a water break while I ran into the house and grabbed that one of the later days of the fire. And when I discovered that my neighbor's house, Pavel's, had been lost due to the fire coming up from the other side of the ridge we were on, where it burned very hot. There were a lot of trees and scorched things seriously there. It had also taken his house. At that point, my cell phone battery was almost dead, and I knew there was no coverage at my house. But when we made it back to the fire station where we had coverage, the fire station normally has a phone, but all the phones were down, all the power was down because all the lines had burned. I had just enough battery to call Pavel because I knew that uncertainty of not knowing if your house was still there or not was very painful. I was able to make a quick call to Pavel to tell him, you know, I'm so sorry to be so brutal, but my battery's dying. Your house is gone. So that he could at least focus on, move from the uncertainty and the stress of the uncertainty to the grieving and dealing with the certainty that is gone. And sent a quick text message to my wife letting her know that, well, we'd survived another day of fire activity and our house was still there. But, you know, every day that you survive, the odds go up that you're going to make it through the whole week. But it was, you know, each day I just wasn't taking it for granted. There were houses still being lost due to wind shifts and difficulty getting enough resources where we needed them. So that was most of the fire.
Some of the statistics of the fire are fairly interesting to me. The reason that some houses burned the first day and some houses burned the second day and some houses burned the third day had to do with the topography of County Road 83.
Yeah.
And maybe you can explain to me a little more why a fire of the size this was, and you can tell us what that was too, how it hopscotched and why some houses were burned and others weren't, side by side.
Yeah. Normally, I'm really into the numbers and the statistics. This fire was just so overwhelming that I actually don't know the acreage. I have the, you know, after big fires, people make, you know, a firefighting T-shirt for those involved, and it has the statistics on it. So I own a shirt with the acreage on it. I have no idea. It was big. I know we lost a third of the homes in our district, and you know, that's just overwhelming to me that I've been, you know, an active firefighter for over 20 years, sort of in a sense training for the big fire, planning for the big fire, expecting, you know, that we may have another fire. When I moved here in '90, it was just after the Black Tiger fire, which is a big devastating fire, and I was taking firefighting classes, getting certified in structure firefighting, getting certified in wildland firefighting. And the Black Tiger fire was still very much on everyone's minds. And so there were a lot of talks of the lessons learned and what happened. And yeah, it was just devastating to not be able to save more of the district. You know, one of the goals that I had not had the personal time to champion was to create another exit from County Road 83. That the Den Road really was an impediment to getting people up there safely. I mean, the one statistic I do know is that for as big as the fire was, and for it being Colorado's most financially destructive fire, nobody was seriously hurt or killed, which is not the case of big fires in Texas and California, Arizona. Other places have massive fires, and firefighters and or residents end up not surviving it. And so we were some combination of lucky and skilled, and it's always an interesting debate what the relative ratio of luck and skill is. But we managed. You know, I think somebody got a broken finger, but they got it taped back up and went back out on the fire immediately. You know, they weren't going to sit out the fight just because of a broken finger. And yeah, you know, other people like me, you know, mild burns on the backs of my legs, those heal. You're a little more sensitive to heat for a few days. But no serious injuries. That's the statistic I remember. And as much as it's tempting to play the what-if game, if you fairly play the what-if game, might have been able to save more houses if we'd done this differently or that differently, but we also might have been able to lose somebody. So that's...
Which direction did the fire come from originally toward County Road 83?
Oh, well, we weren't able to be there when it was there, but I mean, if you look at the map of the houses lost after the fire, I have some fire maps that were created originally by Jim Birch, who's no longer with us, but he was fire marshal of Sunshine for many years. He created some hand-drawn maps of the district and marked every house. And I have copies of those. And my wife Felicity took the list of houses that were lost and marked up the maps with X's on the house that were lost. And it really illustrates that the almost complete loss of houses along the 4-mile side of Sunshine Canyon. The Sunshine Canyon road is a ridge road, not a valley road. It's not in the bottom of the canyon. And the fire that came up there was really hot and intense. And so virtually all of the houses in the section where it came up along the 4-mile side of the canyon were lost. When it crossed the road and started going towards the town of Sunshine, it was much more wind-driven, and it was probably multiple fire starts from spots. And so it burned up to the houses from multiple directions, different houses, different areas. And yeah, there were areas that burned lightly where the trees didn't burn that much, but the grasses burned. There were areas where the trees burned hard, and there were areas that were untouched. We were fortunate in that the historic sort of downtown of Sunshine, the old houses, the fire did not come up through there. If the wind had been different, it could have, even on day 2 or 3, the wind could have shifted and it could have come up through there, completely wiping out that area, which there were some residents in that area. I'm very grateful that not only did we not lose that additional property, but we didn't lose the people who were there. They would not have had a good place to go. So it was...
At that point, you had wind coming from varying directions, and you had flames of what height would you say? That varied too, I'm sure.
We weren't... It's one of the things that... you spend years training for the big war. You want to be the guy who's on the front lines at the big fight, and you want to feel like you did all the good work. We, as much for all our attempts, weren't really on the flame front when it came through. So I didn't see the big flames there. The garage was started when I got up there to try and save the house that was attached to it. The other areas, there was, the fire had this burning, it was threatening that, but it wasn't. It was more the flame front had come through and left this pile of heavy fuels burning, all that. And so it was very scattered. There were areas that were not so burned. But also coupled with that is it's almost even hard to remember now, and it's really harder to describe. Just how even for the whole week, the smoke in the area, if you looked from town, you could see all the smoke. But the smoke was so heavy, if you wanted to see something, you had to drive to it. And so if you weren't right at the right spot, you didn't see it. So what I saw was a lot of smoke. And a lot of, some houses burns, some houses burning. You know, just now, you know, remember being at one house, trying to make sure it was going to be okay. The house next to us was gone, and the person must have had a fair bit of ammunition, because as we were working there, you know, all the ammunition was cooking off and going pop, pop, bang, 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 pop, 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 bang, bang, bang. So, but, and, you know, definitely heard. There were times when we could see more what was happening towards Fourmile, particularly on the first day as it was hitting. And you could see the nature of the smoke change from the big gray cloud of smoke. There would be suddenly a thick black dark column, and that's a house going up. And so we could really see from a distance, oh, it got another house, and oh, they lost another house. And so we would definitely tell that. But to some extent, it's not just, you know, an accident. You do try and avoid being standing there as the big wall of flame comes over you. Particularly when you don't have good escape routes or a good safety zone. You do try and come up after it and save the stuff that's still savable, or prep things before it. So.
And you mentioned when the fire was declared out, I'm not sure, what day was that when they finally declared? It
was towards the end of the week. I don't know about out, but you know, it was clear that it was contained and it was mop up. You know, but sometime on the weekend is what I think of it. That's when I fought the fire almost every day during that week. The weekend I finally, you know, called it. When I moved back up, I was eager to come back up. My wife and kids stayed in town with power and water and phone.
And access to school and a few other things.
Yeah, I was, as soon as we were allowed back in, I wanted to be back up here. But I spent almost all my time trying to rig up a point-to-point wireless internet so I could have net connectivity and a phone service.
And business still operating.
And working on cleanup and buying fuel for generators and changing oil with generators. And there were some other people like Peter Beresford who were eager to be back up. But yeah, we would sort of meet each other as we're getting more fuel for the generators. That it was a full-time job just coping with the lack of infrastructure. And actually, when they demobilized the federal fire and handed it back over to us, there were not many of us. It was pretty much Rick Lansky, Peter Beresford, and I, and Henry Ballard, and Eric Bader, who tended to be involved in the final management stages of the fire. Or I don't know if he even went to the other fire up near Fort Collins, but Rick, Peter, Henry, and I were running a lot of calls. We were what was left of the fire department, because a lot of people, Mike Sanders just blew me away that his house was lost, and he was still fighting the fire the whole week. You know, Bruce Honeyman, our fire chief, his house was lost. He was fighting the fire for most of the week. But after the fire, you know, they were focusing on dealing with the loss of their house and such, so they weren't around to help run all the calls. And there were a lot of little fuels that would flare up that we'd have to hike in and go put out, or smoke reports we'd have to check out, and people were very nervous, or incidents that happened with the cleanup of houses. So we had several, whereas normally we have a few calls a month, we were having a few calls a day of fire calls, and you know, half as many people to run them.
Right.
So it was busy.
And so there you had a chance to be a hero if you'd wanted. But
yes. Yeah, that was one of the post-fire things that, you know, I am grateful to the people who appreciate that as a group of volunteers we did everything we could, and you know, we all wish we could have done more or done better, but There was the "We Love You Firefighters" sign in the canyon. There was the thank you parade. The parade was definitely a surreal experience. Our chief, Bruce Honeyman, at the time, he stepped down after the fire. Brett took over. Had agreed that we would provide firefighters to march in the parade. So I was really uncomfortable, having people thank me and call me a hero when we had lost a third of our district. We didn't win the war. The victory parade seemed somewhat inappropriate to me, but it was nice to have people appreciate it, because I know that people like Bruce and others, and me to a little extent, people have been angry. They've been upset that we didn't save their home. It's, human nature, but it's certainly hard to stand up and take a bow for having lost the war. So,
although in so many ways you won the war, because of, if I recall the statistics, or something like there were 150 houses more or less in this district, and 56 were lost.
Yeah.
Meaning that was 100 that you saved. Yeah.
Although the question of how much it was us or the nature of the fire or the homeowners who had done mitigation and other things, like any fire, there is being studied, and the Udall's report just came out. They're the houses that were goners no matter what we did. We could not have saved pretty much any of the houses on the 4 Mile side of Sunshine Canyon. It was just too hot. And there were houses that were saved due to which we can't take any credit for. And there were the ones in the margins that we lost that maybe we could have saved if we'd had more people in the time, or the ones we saved that we could have lost if we weren't there. In this fire, actually, the ones where we could have made a difference, or we did make a difference, were a fraction of the houses. Mm-hmm. And so, we lost a third of the district. If we hadn't been there, we would have lost more, I like to think. And if we'd had more people, we would have lost fewer. But we could not have saved. We couldn't have changed it till we lost a tenth or less. That wasn't in the cards.
So even if you'd had 100 firefighters up Sunshine Canyon when the first flames came through, it wouldn't have saved.
We would have lost a lot of houses, anyway. And possibly a few firefighters.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a limit to what you can do with people on the ground against a wind-driven massive fire.
At the end of the fire, or after at the end of the first week, I should say, you were aware of things going on in the fire area by, say, XL.
Yeah.
That eventually helped people get back into their homes. How long was it before Felicity and the girls did move back up to your house?
They came home reasonably quickly. I was sort of lobbying for them. I told them, hey, look, I got the generator running. With the generator running, we can run the well off the generator. We actually bought a Honda generator that runs quiet enough that we could run it 24/7 to power, cell phone chargers and other things, and fire up the big generator to run the well when we needed to do showers or other things. But it was only a few days for them to come up. Mm-hmm. But we were staying at a friend's house, and we were somewhat eager to get back to our own stuff and start cleaning up and helping our neighbors clean up.
And how, sort of as a wrap up, what comments would you make about how you personally felt at the end of the fire?
It was Like many things, you know, it was a stressful, traumatic event. Those of us whose houses survived were really circumspect about complaining about any troubles we're having, because I had close friends, you know, who Pavel's house was not survives, didn't survive. Stephen D's house didn't survive. Our fire chief, you know, Mike Sanders. So many people's houses didn't survive, and they were dealing with so much more than us that we tend to downplay the difficulties we have. But I definitely would tear up every time I drove down the canyon. I tended to not go down the canyon as much. Still, a year later, I don't go down to town as much. I used to go down to town for lunch. Now I tend not to. When I took a class, a hazardous materials certification class at the Boulder Reservoir, which is where the command post was, and we'd begin our firefighting day at the reservoir, getting the morning briefing and objective briefings and weather briefings and assignments before heading up here. I took a class there in January, months after the fire. And when I drove down for the first class, I sat in the car and cried before going in, just because it was so emotional to be back at the training center for the first time after the fire. It was definitely a relief to see everything covered in snow and not black anymore. I was talking to some of the residents about how I was not the only one who felt that way. And I'm just now getting caught up on the work that, you know, my ability to concentrate was not what it used to be pre-fire. And so I don't know that it's back to what it used to be, but I hired someone who at least is doing the concentrating for me. So.
Anything else you would like to add?
Yes. We were so fortunate we didn't lose anyone. It was a big fire. And I definitely talked to other people who were fighting in other areas of the fire about some of their close calls and hairy exploits. I'm just grateful we didn't lose anyone.
Thank you. We appreciate you sharing and going through some of the thoughts and feelings that are still with you.
Thank you.